Baltimore's once celebrated as a powerhouse of industry, the heartbeat of Maryland's economy, driven by thriving steel mills and bustling shipyards. But those days are distant memories now, rusted relics of a vibrant past. What replaced the hum of factories and the bustle of docks was silence, a silence heavy with consequences, skyrocketing unemployment, spiraling poverty, and an unprecedented surge in homelessness. Number 1. The real picture of homelessness in Maryland. Imagine walking through downtown Baltimore. You hear the sounds of the harbor, smell the Old Bay seasoning from the crab shacks. Tourists are snapping photos. Boats sway gently on the water. But then, just a few blocks away, the charm fades, the music quiets, and reality hits. In the year 2023, nearly 7,000 people experienced homelessness across Maryland, and on any given night, between 2,500 and 3,000 people have no home to return to, no bed, no door to lock. And here's the hard truth. Baltimore alone accounts for 1,925 of them. That's over 2/3 of the entire state's homeless population, right here in one city. But this isn't just about numbers. This is about people, your neighbors, your co-workers, your fellow Americans. Over 70% of Maryland's homeless are single adults. 15% are families with children, kids doing homework in motel rooms or shelter hallways. 8% are veterans, people who once served this country, now sleeping on sidewalks. And the challenges go deeper. About 30% struggle with addiction. Another 25% face serious mental health conditions like schizophrenia or severe depression. Can you imagine battling that without a roof over your head? Then comes the most glaring injustice: race. Black residents make up just 31% of Maryland's population, but over 60% of those experiencing homelessness. That gap is not a coincidence. It's the result of decades of discrimination, broken systems, and invisible walls. And here's something that shocked even me. The number of older adults, aged 65 and up, experiencing homelessness in Maryland has nearly doubled in recent years, from 677 people in 2018 to 1,199 today. That's a 77% increase. So, let me ask you, when you see someone on the corner holding a cardboard sign, do you keep walking? Or do you wonder, what happened, and could it happen to me? This isn't just a crisis, it's a mirror. And Maryland, like much of America, has to decide, do we look away, or do we finally look closer? What's driving homelessness in Maryland? They say a storm doesn't start with thunder. It begins quietly, winds shifting, skies dimming, a pressure in the air. That's how homelessness in Maryland began, not suddenly but slowly, until it was everywhere. The first wind, housing costs. In cities like Baltimore or Prince George's County, rent for a modest apartment now floats around $1,300 a month. Meanwhile, a worker earning minimum wage, $15 an hour, brings home just over $31,000 a year. That rent eats up nearly half of their paycheck, leaving little for food, medicine, or anything else. Can you survive on what's left? Most can't. And so, they fall. Then comes poverty. In Baltimore alone, nearly 1 in every 5 residents lives below the poverty line. But what's worse? More than half of those live in deep poverty, surviving on less than half of that already low threshold. That's not living. That's barely holding on. And as if that weren't enough, add the heavy weight of health. Nearly 1 in 4 homeless individuals in Maryland struggles with a serious mental illness. Another third wrestles with addiction, often to opioids. Silent battles fought in alleyways, shelters, or park benches. Without treatment, without help, how does anyone stand back up? But there's more. The shortage of affordable housing is not just a fact, it's a warning bell. Maryland ranks among the most expensive states when it comes to the hourly wage needed to afford basic housing. Public policies, though well-meaning at times, have moved too slow, while luxury condos rise faster than shelters ever could. And quietly, almost without notice, the elderly have begun to fall through the cracks. In just 6 years, the number of homeless adults over 65 jumped by 77%, from 677 people to nearly 1,200. Many worked their whole lives. Now, they sleep in cars or wait in line for a warm cot and a cup of soup. All these forces, rising rent, low wages, poor access to healthcare, weak policy, didn't just collide, they compounded. They built a system where one wrong step means losing it all. And so, I ask you, is this the kind of Maryland we want to inherit? Or do we believe in something better, something more human? What's being done, and where it fails? Progress always makes headlines, but when it comes to homelessness in Maryland, what's not said is just as important as what is. Yes, there have been real efforts. Statewide, more than 22,000 housing vouchers were issued in the year 2023. That's 22,000 chances for struggling families to find stability, to move out of shelters and into real homes. And in Baltimore, the city shouldering the largest share of the crisis, those vouchers became lifelines. Shelters too are doing what they can. Baltimore offers around 1,200 beds during the year, scaling up to 1,500 when winter tightens its grip. For many, these beds mean survival, especially on nights when temperatures drop below freezing. Organizations like the Helping Up Mission and the Weinberg Center don't just offer shelter, they offer compassion, a meal, a shower, a conversation. In a world that too often looks away, these places look people in the eye. Federal and local support has added some muscle to the fight. Through the Continuum of Care program, the federal government sent $60 million to Maryland in 2023. That funding helped create more than 3,200 permanent supportive housing units, actual homes, matched with CAS workers who support people facing long-term struggles like mental illness or addiction. The state also received $8 million through the Emergency Solutions Grant. That money paid for first month's rent, security deposits, anything to help people get back indoors quickly after an eviction or crisis. And yes, these programs work. Every family placed in stable housing is a victory. Every winter night without a hypothermia death is a quiet success. But behind every win is a line of people still waiting. Baltimore alone needs at least $200 million every single year to fully meet the scale of its housing crisis. That's not a budget gap. That's a canyon. And despite the best efforts, the reality is harsh. Shelters run out long before names on the waiting list do. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, are turned away each night, not because no one cares, but because the system is running on fumes. And that forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. How long can we apply temporary fixes when the foundations beneath us are crumbling? Is it really a solution if it only helps a lucky few while the rest sleep in parking lots or stairwells? This isn't about generosity, it's about priority. Because when a city builds luxury condos faster than it builds shelters, when it pours billions into real estate and just a fraction into affordable housing, what story are we really telling about who deserves a home? And more importantly, who doesn't? 4 solutions that could actually work. They say the system is broken, but maybe the real truth is, it was never built for everyone to begin with. So what if, instead of patching the cracks, we rebuilt the foundation, fairer, stronger, more human? Let's start with the most urgent fix: build more housing that people can actually afford. Right now, Baltimore holds over 700 vacant lots, empty, forgotten. But what if those spaces became homes? Modest, functional, welcoming homes, 5,000 of them, built not for profit but for people. If the state offers real tax incentives to developers who prioritize low-income housing over luxury high-rises, we could reshape the skyline with intention, not just ambition. And what about those who have already fallen through the cracks? Veterans returning from war zones, single mothers juggling 3 jobs, people living with bipolar disorder or recovering from opioid addiction. They don't just need shelter, they need tools, skills, to rebuild their lives. Imagine job training programs tailored just for them. HVAC repair, community health, digital skills careers with dignity, not desperation. And let's expand access to treatment. Right now, only 1 in 5 rehab centers offers income-based pricing. If we raise that to half, imagine how many lives we could stabilize before they hit bottom. Now comes a model that's been proven across the world: housing first. The principle is simple: give people a home first, no conditions, no red tape. Then address addiction, unemployment, or mental health, because how can anyone recover if they don't even know where they'll sleep tonight? Baltimore could lead the way. A pilot of 500 units, rent capped at 30% of income, even if that income is zero. Add CAS workers, health services, job counselors. Watch what happens when dignity becomes the starting point, not the reward. And let's not ignore what we've too often buried beneath the data: race. 60% of Maryland's homeless population is Black. That's not just disparity, that's history catching up. It's time we turn policy into justice. Follow 1,000 scholarships a year to Black youth in underserved neighborhoods. Break cycles before they begin. Enforce laws against voucher discrimination, and ensure that minority families have first access to affordable housing in their own communities before they're priced out and pushed aside. Because the truth is, we know what works. We don't need to imagine solutions, we just need to choose them. So maybe the real question isn't how to fix homelessness. It's whether we finally have the courage to. And if we do, maybe, just maybe, that empty lot down the block could be someone's second chance. Number 5. A foundation called community. Plans are powerful, but without something solid underneath, even the best ones collapse. And when it comes to fighting homelessness, that foundation is not just policy or money, it's people, it's community. Now imagine this. What if every neighborhood in Maryland had its own housing liaison? Someone who isn't just an outsider with paperwork, but a trusted, local, trained, connected, and ready to step in before a family hits rock bottom. Someone who notices when the rent's late, or when someone's struggling quietly behind closed doors. In 2025, cities like Denver and Austin have begun piloting similar roles, and early reports show they've reduced emergency shelter admissions by over 20%. But let's not stop there. Picture mobile eviction prevention teams, not sheriffs with notices, but CAS workers with solutions. They knock, not to evict, but to offer help. Mediation between tenants and landlords, emergency rental assistance, even access to legal aid. New York's Right to Counsel program showed that when tenants had legal support, over 80% avoided eviction. So what's stopping us? Zooming out, think bigger. Public housing banks, not just cheap boxy apartments, but real, publicly owned mixed housing, with balconies, green spaces, community kitchens, designed not as punishment for being poor, but as proof of dignity. Baltimore alone owns over 700 vacant lots. What if those became something beautiful? And maybe it's time Maryland tried something bold, a universal rent stabilization pilot. Capping rent increases in the hardest-hit zip codes could slow down gentrification, protect seniors on fixed incomes, and let families stay rooted. In Oregon, a similar law passed in 2023 and already shows signs of reducing displacement in Portland's lowest-income neighborhoods. Even small things matter: zoning reform, public land trusts, tax credits for turning vacant buildings into homes. Yes, they sound technical, but each one is a brick in the wall between stability and despair. If you believe every family deserves a shot at staying in their community, comment 1. But if you think housing should remain just a market product, bidding goes to the highest offer, comment 0. Because how we answer shapes what kind of Maryland we become. Number 6. Strengthen the social safety net. It's not flashy, it doesn't make headlines. But the social safety net is what keeps thousands from falling all the way down. Think of it like the bones beneath the body of a just society, quiet, often ignored, but essential to holding everything together. Start with temporary cash assistance, known as TCA. In 2023, it reached over 22,000 families across Maryland. That's 22,000 homes where the light stayed on for just a little longer. But let's be honest, $250 a month isn't enough. In Baltimore, that barely covers 1 week of rent. The caps are tight, and the clock runs out too soon. For a single mother raising 2 kids, this lifeline often frays before the month is even over. Then there's Medicaid, a giant in the background. It now covers 1.5 million Marylanders, about 1 in 4 people in the state. And for those living on the streets, it offers more than checkups. It means access to mental health care, addiction treatment, hope. But here's the catch. Only 60% of the state's addiction clinics accept it. So the people who need care the most often find doors closed, wait lists endless, and options disappearing just when they're ready to reach for help. Next is SNAP, what many of us know as food stamps. Every month, it puts groceries on the table for 780,000 Marylanders. That's more than the entire population of San Francisco. And yet, tens of thousands who qualify never apply. Forms are confusing, systems are slow, and yes, there's shame. Stigma that turns asking for help into a hidden struggle. Have you ever known someone who skipped meals just to feed their kids? Chances are, you have. They just never told you. And then there's the State Homelessness Fund, $10 million last year, helping around 2,500 people find beds, avoid eviction, or stay in transitional housing. But Baltimore alone needs 20 times that much. That's the gap between surviving and solving. We don't always see these programs, but they're there, in school lunchrooms, in waiting rooms, in shelters and church basements, quiet acts of protection. When they work, you don't notice, but when they fail, you feel it, you see it, on sidewalks, under overpasses, in the faces of children trying to do homework by flashlight. You don't have to be in poverty to feel this story. You just have to live in a world where any of us, given the right storm, could need a net too. And isn't that reason enough to make sure it holds? Not just for them, but for all of us. Number 7, the path forward, hope or collapse. In every city there comes a moment when it must decide what kind of future it is building, whether it is simply expanding upward or truly reaching outward toward the people who have always lived in its shadows. For Maryland, that moment is no longer in the distance. It's here, present in every eviction notice taped to a front door, in every shelter bed turned down because capacity has been reached, in every child doing homework in the back seat of a car parked just out of sight. For too long, our solutions have been temporary by design. We offer shelter, but not permanence. A voucher, but no vacancy. We measure success by units built, but forget to ask who they were built for. And so the crisis persists, not because we lack the means, but because we have not yet summoned the will to act together, with boldness, with clarity, and with compassion that is more than seasonal. True change demands more than political gestures or emergency funding cycles. It means rethinking how we define value in a society, placing dignity above return on investment, stability above short-term gain. Maryland has the potential to be more than a cautionary tale. It could be the blueprint, a state that doesn't just respond to homelessness, but rewrites the conditions that allow it to exist. By the year 2030, we could see something extraordinary. Neighborhoods rebuilt not just with bricks and beams, but with trust, with equity, with the understanding that housing is not a privilege for the fortunate, but a foundation for all. But to reach that future, we must act in the present. We must choose to build structures that last longer than budget cycles. We must design systems that bend toward fairness, not convenience. And we must decide clearly, finally, that the cost of inaction is far greater than the price of change. This is not just about where people sleep. It is about where we, as a society, stand. Because if we fail to act now decisively, collectively, and with courage, then what collapses next will not just be the housing system, but our very belief that we are capable of something better. Hope is not found, it is built, together. We travel not just to admire beauty, but to seek truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Today, we've ventured into the heart of Maryland, beyond the picturesque harbor views and vibrant streets, to confront the harsh reality of homelessness. It's a story that often remains hidden beneath the surface, overshadowed by brighter narratives. Yet, it's precisely these uncomfortable truths that define our humanity and compel us to act. Behind each statistic shared today is a person, a veteran who once served proudly, a single parent striving tirelessly, a child trying to navigate life without a stable home. Their stories are mirrors reflecting our collective responsibility and challenge us to ask, what kind of community do we want to build? Change begins when we choose not to look away, but to understand deeply and compassionately. If today's exploration moved you, I'd love for you to join me on this ongoing journey of discovery and empathy. Subscribe, like, or share your insights in the comments below. Your engagement helps amplify voices that often go unheard. At NVL Travel Documentary, your voice matters profoundly, because understanding is only the first step. Real, meaningful change comes when we act together.